In an opinion piece loaded with high-impact news nuggets, there is a particularly interesting detail hiding near the bottom. Quote, given the instability many witnessed, there were early whispers within the cabinet of invoking the 25th Amendment, which would start a complex process for removing the president. The 25th Amendment. So what is it? Can it do what the author says? And better yet, should it? Now, you might think the 25th Amendment, which spells out presidential succession, is an old concept, but it's not. The text is relatively recent, born right after John F. Kennedy died, thought up by members of administration, including his brother Bobby, who shuddered to think what might have happened had the president been only incapacitated in Dallas. In fact, as recently as 1965, this nation had no real plan for what to do if a president couldn't discharge his duties. The issue first came up way back in 1841, when William Henry Harrison died just a month after taking office. No one really knew what to call Vice President John Tyler. Critics simply called him Your Accidency. 4 decades later, President James Garfield was shot and lingered incapacitated for more than 2 months. Afraid of causing a constitutional crisis, Vice President Chester A. Arthur, of the really great Sideburns, avoided doing anything presidential, and the government ground to a halt. In 1919, President Woodrow Wilson had a stroke, and his second wife, Edith, essentially ran the country for 18 months. By that point, the 25th Amendment was long overdue, but it took the Kennedy assassination to get it written. And it didn't get used by a president for another 2 decades when President Reagan had a 1985 surgery. But it got its first real test 2 years later. That's when incoming Reagan Chief of Staff Howard Baker was urged to consider it after reports that Reagan was in mental decline. Baker agreed to observe the president for deficiencies, and when he didn't find any, the 25th Amendment was never mentioned again in the Reagan White House. It's been invoked just twice more, both by George W. Bush for colonoscopies, and that's really been it. So the question we're confronting today is whether the 25th Amendment could be used to remove a president who some feel, as the unnamed White House writer puts it, is, quote, detrimental to the health of our republic. The short answer is not easily. Remember, the amendment was written primarily to address physical incapacity, but it does include a section never used on removing a president deemed unfit. And that section reads like a Rube Goldberg machine. Basically, it goes like this. The vice president, along with the majority of the cabinet, can send a letter to the president pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, declaring that the president, as former Senator Birch Bayh colorfully put it, is nutty as a fruitcake. And then as soon as that letter is received, bam, the president is out, and the vice president becomes the acting president. But not so fast. The president can then write his own letter and send it back to Congress, saying he's feeling perfectly fine, after which the vice president and a majority of the cabinet still want him gone. They have to send another letter. Now, once that happens, within 3 weeks, 2/3 of Congress must vote to declare the president unfit. Otherwise, he becomes president again, and the VP goes back to his old job, but presumably not for long. The odds of that happening, that the president's VP, the bulk of his cabinet, and 2/3 of both houses of Congress would turn on him are incredibly long. So while the 25th Amendment makes for some interesting history, the chances it gets written into President Trump's history are slim, to say the least. And that's your reality check.